Hello and welcome to the Human Behind the Career Brand podcast. I'm the host, Jeanette Walton. I'm a career brand consultant and Humans Matter champion. I'm committed to helping others deep dive into their many human facets that make them unique, fabulous beings. Research is indicating that humans more than ever are craving human connection across both professional and consumer contexts. And this is despite, and maybe even because of, the onslaught of AI and other digital technologies. My primary mission with this podcast is to inspire each of us to value and appreciate our multifaceted strengths, experiences, and offerings. And that's both as professionals and as human beings. And hopefully through this podcast highlight that human stories and human connections will always matter, both personally and professionally. So my very first guest for this podcast series is Amanda Anastasi. In addition to her gig as a fellow career development consultant, something we both do, Amanda is a highly regarded poet in Melbourne. She's the author of Taking Apart the Bird Trap. She's been a poet in residence for the Monash Climate Change Communication Research Hub. And she received a Neilma Sydney Literary Travel Grant from Writers Victoria recently to visit and write about the environmental threats at the Great Barrier Reef. So important now. Her corresponding poetry will feature at the COP30 Brazil conference, which is very exciting. But wait, there's more. Amanda has also received the Wheeler Centre Hot Desk Fellowship. She's the convener of the La Mama Poetica in Carlton and has been published in multiple local and international journals. She has also used poetry to develop and facilitate workshops that help people navigate the grieving process and other life challenges. Love that. It's so fabulous to have Amanda here to tell us a bit more about her multidimensional passions and hobbies where poetry takes centre stage. So welcome, Amanda. It's lovely to have you here.
Lovely to be here, Jeanette.
So let's get into this. I firstly want to ask you, what made you get into poetry? Why is it such a passion of yours?
Well, I was a big reader as a kid. And so I developed this real love of storytelling and language. I was one of those kids that, I would read a story or a poem and I'd cry if the character or the emotion, I would feel everything. And I loved the idea of, how would I do that? Like, I want to be able to transport people and use words in a way that has that sort of power and ability to make people feel something. So it was always something that I enjoyed, and I've always loved language. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and I suppose poetry was where I found, where I was getting published and where I sort of had a natural fit. I love the economy of language in poetry. It's a challenging art form.
It is. I've tried.
It's not for everyone. It's very niche. Yeah. But I love the challenge, and you have to really love it to do it. Because
as you say, it's very niche, isn't it, poetry, yeah?
It is.
People I've encountered, we've both done writing tertiary studies and
yes,
poetry elements, yeah, and others I've met similar to you are very passionate about poetry when they're into it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you think poetry benefits you personally?
Poetry, it's carried me through a lot of difficult and complex times in my life. Like, in addition to the love of language and the love of storytelling, poetry is a form of self-expression, and it's a way of questioning and interrogating the world and your experiences and your emotions. So it's been a kind of a constant companion, a constant sort of solace in my life, and in many ways a really healthy way of dealing with things like grief and other difficult life experiences. And in that context, poetry for me was almost a form of reportage, but also a way of expressing love and exploring the personality of my father in Taking Apart the Bird Trap. There were all these unsaid things, and he was still kind of a mystery to me. So I used poetry to sort of explore that relationship and explore him as a person and my own grieving. And an interesting thing that happened was, after I finished writing that book, the weight of the grief lightened. And And, you know, that's why I started running workshops around writing through grief because I saw what it did for me. And I wanted to share that with people. And yeah,
That's lovely. That's
it's just,
lovely.
it's been a huge part of my life. And I don't even know what my life would be like if I wasn't writing poetry. It scares me to think. Yeah.
Such a passion. I saw a post of yours recently where you talked about poetry helps us to slow down as well in life.
Yeah. Well, in order to write a poem or even to read a poem, you need to slow down and just stop. And the thing is, we're living such busy lives and we're always on the go. And this is the reason why so many people don't think about issues like climate change or this and that. We're all just trying to survive and trying to sort
Yeah.
of get, and I think when you engage with art and particularly poetry, you do have to stop and think and reflect and ask questions.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say it's cause for reflection, isn't it? Poetry,
Yes, very
along with a
much.
lot of other artistic forms. And just touching on the grieving process workshops that you're doing, have you seen any personal benefits with people who've attended, or have you had any feedback about the benefits of those people who've attended?
Yes, yes. Well, during the actual workshop, you see people getting emotional and you see them actually just seeing them writing is like this hugely this thing that gives me a lot of satisfaction. And they share things with each other during the workshop. And then afterwards, of course, you get emails and people that give you feedback. And I had one poet who actually had the courage to read on the open mic for the first time after doing my workshop. And sometimes people come back to me and say, oh, that poem that I started writing in your workshop, I've developed it and then I sent it here, I read it here. And that's really nice. And really, I'm just facilitating a space for people to allow themselves to express and process whatever is inside them.
So it doesn't have to be grief, it's other major life changes too, yeah?
Sure,
Or impacts.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done a few different workshops. At the moment, it's the grieving, writing through grief, but writing on any subject, you are really. It's a very vulnerable place to be. It's
It's being vulnerable, isn't it?
Yeah, and one thing I tell my workshop participants is I want you to write as if nobody is going to read it. Because as soon as they think they have to read it or share it or perform it, they start censoring themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's so important. They can share it if they choose to, and they have that opportunity, but don't think you have to because we don't want any obstacles, no censorship, just whatever you have, let's get it on the page. And the more embarrassed you feel about writing it, the better it's going to be. That's where the gold is, when you feel uncomfortable.
Because it's about what we feel
It's
more
the
than
real
what we
stuff.
think, isn't it? Our
Yeah.
feelings,
Yeah.
how we feel inside is so much more important than what we think. I'm actually trying to focus on that more these days myself, yeah, in terms of how I live my life, like following my
Yeah.
feelings more than my thoughts. Yeah,
Yes.
beautiful. How do you think it's helped you with your own grieving process? Like you lost your father, and how do you think running the poetry workshops as well as using poetry through the grieving process, in what way do you think it's really been beneficial to you personally?
In a way, I'm revisiting the experience of writing the book when I run the workshop. And so I start with the first thing I have to do in the workshop is make myself sort of share my story with them first so that me being vulnerable enables them to relax and be vulnerable and to get
Yes.
into their
It
story.
makes you
So I,
relatable, yeah?
yeah, and I make sure, I'm basically introducing a space where they can talk and express themselves and get things out. And, that was not always something that I found easy to do. Um, so I suppose during my upbringing, I was really encouraged to not express and,
Yes. Me too.
almost that shaming of when you're crying and expression of emotion. So I guess that sort of growing up in that way, probably I really needed poetry. And I think now it's so important to me to express myself in that way, in every way, to communicate clearly and openly and without fear and to encourage others to do the same.
Love it. Absolutely love it. The creative process is so valuable for all of us, yeah? All forms of
It
artistic
is. And I mean,
expression.
look, some people respond to grief by drinking, by doing distracting themselves. It's a very healthy way to grieve is to write it out. I mean, obviously talking to someone, seeing a therapist and all of that, but it's all the same sort of thing where you're getting out where you need to get out and
Yeah,
addressing.
and it's that, something we've talked about in other interviews, not podcasts, but is that the importance of human connection, and those workshops are allowing the human
Yes,
connection too, and that shared
absolutely.
human connection, yeah?
Yeah, and even somebody delivering a poem, sharing it with an audience, um, it is it is connection, it's communication, it's engagement. Because so often you'll write about something that you think is specific to your own experience, and you don't think anyone else is going to relate to it because poetry, good poetry in its essence, is very detailed and something that comes from, you know, the depths. And you think, oh, who's going to want to listen to this? And then you realize the more honest you are and the more detailed and specific you are in your poetry, the more other people connect with it and actually say that thing that you read a poem about. I felt that. I felt that. I
Yeah.
get that. And the opposite happens, and the scarier the stuff that you read, or the more nervous you are about reading certain poems, the more you actually end up connecting because it feels real and people just want to experience something real and to,
Authenticity, so
yeah,
important.
and someone that, and being able to just say, I understand that feeling, but I didn't know how to put it into words and you did, you know?
Yeah, love it, love it. I might have to get back into poetry. Um, a statistic I've seen recently that might excite you a bit if you haven't seen it yourself is I love statistics, as people who follow me would know. A really interesting one that I read just recently is that 66% of today's poetry book buyers are under the age of 34, so youths. Why do you think poetry appears to be coming back in fashion with younger people?
There's an increasing need to engage with poetry and express ourselves creatively, especially in times of uncertainty. There was a real return to poetry during COVID.
Yeah, there
And
you go.
yeah, and I think there's a return to it now, in these times of climate crisis and in times where, like, fascism is turning its ugly head,
Everywhere,
in some parts
everywhere.
of the world. Yeah. And in this age of, digitization, that's the word, when we often feel powerless, that things are moving really fast. Writing poetry, reading poetry reminds us that we're human, you know, that we are
Yeah.
more than a consumer and a commodity.
Getting back to the basics, yeah?
Yeah.
What
And
really matters.
that each of us has a unique voice. And so often in this society we feel silenced or unheard. And for somebody, especially a young person, to just get up on an open mic, for instance, and read a poem. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they feel like they're heard.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes. Yeah, and it's sharing our authenticity, isn't it? Our rawness, our
yes,
emotions. Yeah, love it, love it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you have another gig as a career development consultant, specialising in writing resumes, etc. So, how would you say your poetry benefits you in terms of your profession?
Well, so obviously I'm helping people write their job applications and their career branding content. So in many ways I am capturing a person and their experience. And that's
Yeah.
precisely what I do with poetry is I listen, I observe, and then I try and capture it in words. So I found this kind of niche professional writing area in the careers industry where I can do what I do with poetry. And obviously, part of poetry is also finding original language and ways of expressing things. And every person is unique. And so when I'm working with a client and doing their, writing for them, I obviously am trying to find a way to capture their unique story and their unique experience.
Yeah, and as we both know, it's so cutthroat out there now that it's so important to make people stand out through their uniqueness, yeah?
Absolutely. And, bring a bit of creative flair to it. you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do sometimes get a bit overexcited, particularly LinkedIn profiles, yeah, for instance, and biographies where, there's more creativity, and sometimes I do have to calm down a bit. I do get a bit
Calm down.
overexcited with the creativity. Great. So, what would you define as your main superpower as a poet?
I think to be able to say a great deal in few words. I'm kind of known for my mono-stitch or one-line poems, and which requires particular conciseness.
One line, did you say?
Yeah,
Wow.
that's
I don't
very
suppose you can give us an
concise.
example of. Can you give us an example of one?
Do you want a climate poem or a non-climate poem?
Yeah, please. Climate poem.
Um, a climate poem. The koala that survives cannot find a leaf. Well, that poem is talking about the multi-pronged threat to the koala. So yeah, the koala survives the bushfire, but then its habitat has been destroyed as well. So you get, this species is, obviously overcoming one hurdle to find another one, to find another one. And so in just that sentence, that's what I'm conveying without
Very
writing a
powerful.
huge long essay or
Yeah, very powerful. And it's funny because I like, as a fellow writer, I often think, I also edit for a living. And I think that's quite handy for keeping the writing really tight when you're writing resumes and stuff, yeah, where it's really important. But obviously poetry has that advantage too, yeah, that background in poetry, you know how to keep the writing tight as well.
yeah, I try. And it's about finding the perfect words to, well, in the sense, in the form, as far as poetry, to move people, you know,
Yeah.
and to find the most original and true language possible, and I just get a thrill from that. It's like, some people get excited about fixing things. That's not me. I'm not good with my hands at all. But, it's the same thing when I find, when I write, say, a 5-word poem that summarizes a situation with precision. It's like an arrow hitting a target. It's a great feeling.
Yeah. And I guess really all forms of writing is to
Mm,
move people, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
Even like a resume is
Anything.
to motivate action and interest. So,
You've got
yeah.
to grab people's attention. You've got to
Yeah,
be engaging and you've got to be doing something different.
absolutely. And we might have touched on this a little bit, but I was going to ask you what really drives you to be an advocate of poetry? Like how do you think it benefits all of us in terms of human beings?
Poetry has so many benefits. We talked about how it enables us to connect with each other, to share that common human experience and common emotions. It gives us voice. There are some things that can't really be talked about. I mean, you can explore things in a deeper way in poetry, in a more resonant way. It's a conveyor of ideas. It invites deep thinking, and as I mentioned, it's just self-expression in itself is incredibly healthy and good for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. Geez, you're
Yeah.
really swaying me to get back into poetry. I
And it
put those
include
poetry books down years ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Poetry is just it's so many things, and it can be so many things. People think
yeah.
poetry is just like Shakespeare or Banjo Patterson or something. There's so many different styles. There's so many directions you can go in. It's an amazing
It's open to
genre to explore.
interpretation, a bit like
It is
visual art. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And who would you say is your favourite poet of all time and why?
Oh,
Yeah, it's probably a hard one for you.
probably T.S. Eliot. He's able to combine sort of emotional resonance with kind of intellectual ideas. He engages with the big questions like around existence and time and, the wasteland. And, you know, there is a musicality in his poetry that I like, rhythm. I mean, I also admire the work of Sylvia Plath, and Ariel.
Oh,
The
yes.
collection Ariel was the first adult poetry book that I read as a kid. But I
I
also love
imagine her
Neruda.
poetry is quite raw based on her story.
Yeah. I didn't know it hit me when I first read her poetry. I was like 10. I was
Wow.
like, "I don't know what this means, but I like it."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And obviously I've revisited it since then. But I love Neruda too, because his poetry is deeply human and he's able to tackle politics and love and nature and the mystery of existence through poetry. So he can write about anything.
Not heard of him. I'll have to check him out.
Yeah.
And what would you say has been your most you've got a lot of achievements. What would you say has been your most outstanding achievement to date as a poet?
I think it's just seeing my poems in places where I don't expect them to be and that I didn't foresee they would be.
Yeah. So being published.
And usually, to me, it's an achievement, yeah, but also published in places outside of the literary scene where I've reached somebody outside of that. So, I've had poems in Best Australian Science Writing, and usually in that anthology, it's scientific writing, and it's only
Yeah.
occasionally that I include poets. So that was pretty cool. And look, honestly, the COP30,
I was
to have
just
my
going to say the
poem involved
climate
with
change
that,
one.
that's pretty big because it's kind of an international audience and it was the most challenging thing I've done as well.
To encapsulate,
I
would
I
that line about the koala would be an example of it, yes?
well, I had to write a new poem in response. I actually attended this event called Global Ethical Stocktake in the Oceania region, and I had to listen to a range of speakers, economists, lawyers, Indigenous people, about the impacts of human and ethical impacts of climate change. And I had to
Yeah,
write a
wow.
poem in response to everything I heard on that day. And it
Wow.
had to be a poem that could be proud of, and they were impacts that spanned the entire Oceania region. So, uh, I'm writing from an Australian perspective, but I had to also understand, Pacific Islander, issues around climate change,
Yeah.
and New Zealand and so it was challenging, but it's probably the most exciting thing that has happened.
What was the allowable length of that poem?
They didn't give me well, I had to read it at the end of the event and they only gave me 5 minutes to read it. So I had a limitation it had to be something I could read within 5 minutes, minus
Wow.
say my introduction. So maybe it would have been it had to be like a 3-minute poem and how that, yeah. So
What an
that was,
amazing opportunity through your poetry, yeah? To engage with all
it
those
is.
different
And
people.
it is. And I was really out of my comfort zone. I'm used to being around other poets and other creative people. And here I was listening to lawyers and economists and political leaders in the area of climate change. But this space was different because this space was people who were actually offering up solutions. They weren't just doing political speak. They were,
Yeah.
this is what needs to happen. This is what the politicians and the leaders who are going to make decisions at COP30, these are the things they need to consider. This is what's happening to us. And it was really eye-opening and
I
just
bet
an
it
honor to
was.
be included.
Yeah, yeah. What an amazing life experience through your poetry.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty special.
Let's get a bit pessimistic for a moment. I mean, climate change is already a bit pessimistic, but unfortunately, if the
Yeah.
world and your life was to end tomorrow, what would your reflection be on the way poetry has helped you to live a more fulfilling life?
My gosh,
How has poetry helped you to live a more fulfilling life?
a more fulfilling life. You know, in order to write poetry well, I think, and to get better at writing poetry, you've got to write truthfully. And to be a truthful writer, you need to live your life truthfully, you know?
Yeah,
So it has influenced my life choices, being a creative, being a poet. Because if I live in fear or place limits on my ability to experience life fully, my poetry will suffer and become small minded. It won't go anywhere. So as my life has expanded and as I've made brave decisions in my life, my poetry has expanded and flourished. And also and it's moved me in new and unexpected directions. And obviously poetry has taken me and put me in spaces where I wouldn't have been in if I was not writing poetry. So the way I live my life and the poetry I write are very much interconnected and make each other better.
It's been your constant ally.
Yes, and I'm sort of taking that further as far as doing workshops and also look, running La Mama Poetica, I platform other poets. I celebrate other poets, so I'm not just doing this for myself and my own life. I really believe in it as an art form, and I really enjoy nurturing other poets and yeah, just making sure poetry and literature is celebrated and platformed and it's part of the Melbourne life. So I'm just very much involved in that as well as sitting in a room
And
writing.
beyond, no doubt, with being involved in climate change forums.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, look, I submit to poems internationally as well, so I don't consider myself just I consider myself a global citizen and a
Yeah,
human. I don't sort of like I'm this nationality and this, and I really do think of that whole human experience, and it doesn't matter where you come from. You can engage with a poem. We're all connected.
we all have similar emotions and feelings
Hmm.
wherever we are, yeah.
Absolutely.
And just the fact that you're invited to participate in this climate change forum, this global climate change forum, it really highlights the power of poetry, that poetry is recognised for its power, yeah?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. And lastly, this is probably to indulge me now as a career branding consultant who's very passionate about branding people effectively. And we can play with this a bit. It doesn't have to be serious. I don't expect you to go away and brand yourself as this. But what would you say would be your ideal career branding to convey you as a multi-dimensional human?
Oh, okay. Obviously, I'm essentially a writer, but I'm a communicator of often confronting realities
Yeah,
and the complexity of being human and maintaining one's humanity in this landscape that we find
yeah.
ourselves in now.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because that could obviously apply in your profession as
Yeah.
well, yeah? Those more complex cases
Yes,
that you deal with, more complex projects, etc. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, fabulous. All right, just before we wrap this up, is there anything in particular you'd like to promote about your poetry workshops or your writings? Is there any way what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if perhaps someone wanted to go to one of your grieving process workshops or attend La Mama Poetica in Carlton?
Yes. So you can always just go to my website, www.amandaanastasipoetry.com. My books are there. I do have a Writing Through Grief workshop on December 7th in Brunswick. That's on my website if you want to look for it. And there is a Zoom version of that too, because not everyone can get to Brunswick. And La Mama Poetica is going to be back in 2026. You can go to the La Mama Theatre website to check out what's happening poetry-wise at La Mama Theatre if you want to experience some poetry in Melbourne.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking poetry with you, Amanda. You really have got me stirred up in terms of going back and reading some of those poets I looked at many years ago and thought this is too hard for me. Maybe I should get a go.
Do
So
it.
thank you for sharing your multi-dimensional fabulous self with us. And you're going to be my first podcast guest, the first one I launched. So thank you for
I'm
joining me.
honoured. I'm honoured, Jeanette. It was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.